Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moppin coming at you with another APUS history video. This is taking a look at topic 7.11, interwar foreign policy. Last time we were looking at America's foreign policy in the 1920s that would mostly be described as isolationist, though with a few notable exceptions. Now, following the presidencies of Harding and Coolidge will be Herbert Hoover. And Hoover, like his two predecessors, was also a adherent to mostly isolationist policies. Now, that being said, some other things of note during the Hoover presidency in terms of foreign policy, we're going to start to see a reduction in the use of what we would call dollar diplomacy in Latin America. The idea that kind of started with Taft that, America needs to be actively sending troops into foreign countries in Latin America to defend and prop up American business interests there. Now, that's not to say that we won't in, the future, especially as we get into the Cold War era, kind of renew some of that to some degree. But, there's basically a sentiment starting with Hoover and will be continued with FDR that there's going to be a sense that, hey, we want to improve those relations. And, if we are talking about that, let's go ahead and switch over then and talk about Roosevelt for just a moment in terms of, trying to transition this relationship between us and Latin America, which, remember, had been, kind of contentious. You got to remember, that following the Spanish-American War, we took over Puerto Rico as territory. We turned Cuba into a protectorate, engaging in dollar diplomacy, and, we were kind of seen as, we kind of describe ourselves as the protectors of the Western Hemisphere. Many Latin American countries would kind of view us as the kind of the ogres or bullies of the Western Hemisphere. So what kind of started unofficially with Hoover is going to continue and get a name for it under Roosevelt. This is going to be known as the good neighbor policy. And so, it's a kind of an identification and acceptance of, kind of how we were acting in, kind of, a domineering way with regards to our Latin American neighbors and taking some steps to, try to right some of those wrongs. For example, ending Teddy Roosevelt's Roosevelt corollary policy of basically taking over Latin American debts to Europe and then forcing those Latin American countries to pay us back. We also saw the elimination of the Plat amendments with regards to Cuba. So now Cuba did not have to ask our permission to engage in treaties. We did not have the inherent right to change their government if we didn't think it was best for them. We did keep Guantanamo Bay, but, we're making some statements here that, hey, we are trying to kind of right the wrong in Latin America, though we still had a ways to go. Now, going back to Hoover for just a moment, something else of note that we should be aware of is that during his presidency, we're going to see the expansion of Japanese aggression when in 1931, as you can see here in the map, we're going to be seeing Japanese forces, which already controlled, obviously, the home islands of Japan, but also Korea going back a couple generations, now invades into northern China, a place called Manchuria, and then we'll be basically turning that into a puppet state under the control of the Japanese. Now, this kind of bold, naked aggression is going to be a test for the League of Nations. And, this is the first time that you're going to see this really just kind of aggression. And the League of Nations is going to fall short. It's not going to be able to stop this from happening. And so when the League of Nations is tested and fails this early test, it's not a good sign moving forward. And as we'll talk later, other, would-be aggressors, like Hitler and Mussolini and others, are not going to be particularly nervous about the League of Nations because they won't stand up to aggression. Now, that being said, here in the United States, in response to Japan's takeover of Manchuria, we will be issuing what's known as the Stimson Doctrine, which is going to be a refusal to recognize, Japan's acquisition of Manchuria or any other subsequent acquisitions of Japan done by force. So we're not a part of the League of Nations, so we don't have that to be associated with, but we are trying to make a statement that, aggressive expansion is not going to be something that the U.S. is going to be condoning. However, we're not willing to go to war over it, and we're not even willing to cut off trade over this. We're just kind of, sending a message that, hey, Japan, that wasn't very nice. Anyhow, now, moving on, formally on to Franklin Roosevelt. Some important diplomatic achievements. We'll see FDR be the first U.S. president to recognize the Soviet Union. You got to remember, when the Soviet Union's created, as a communist state, that is going to, really scare American political leaders out of a sense of, well, if communism can take over the Soviet Union and we recognize it, that might make it easier for communism to come over here to the United States, which is something we certainly didn't want. But by the time we get to the 1930s, with Stalin firmly entrenched in power, it was pretty clear communism was not leaving the Soviet Union, was not leaving Russia anytime soon. So there was going to be a decision to, either you ignore the Soviet Union, refuse to recognize them, maybe they become chummy with Hitler and Mussolini, and then you got a real problem. So the idea being is, well, do what you got to do sometimes, and the Soviet Union will be recognized. We also, as a sign of, trying to undo the wrongs of imperialism, we do make a promise to the Philippines to grant independence by 1946, which we will in 1946. We also are going to be seeing a commitment to reducing tariffs. Once again, the idea being is that, we're starting to enter into this idea more and more that the more that you have free trade, trade without barriers, be it tariffs, blockades, whatever, that is viewed as a positive, because the more that countries trade with one another and have trading relationships, then that means that it's less likely those countries are going to go to war. Basically, the idea is that, if you go to war, you're going to ruin your ability to have profit by trading with these other countries. So, the idea that, hey, let's, engage in trade versus warfare, that's going to be part of, trying to reduce those tariffs. But unfortunately, as we get into the 1930s, the world is starting to become a much more dangerous place. And a lot of this has to do with the rise of fascism. Be mindful of what fascism is as a political ideology. Fascists believe that individual liberty is not particularly important. What is important is the overall strength and superiority of the nation unto itself. That, in other words, you as an individual exist for the greater glory of that nation. And these countries, these folks that are in, those that are fascists, believe in intense, strong nationalism. They tend to believe that their nationality is superior to others, therefore they have the legitimate right, the justification to dominate their neighbors. So you tend to see a very strong correlation between fascism and aggressive expansionism. Now, fascism is a type of totalitarianism, but do not confuse fascism with communism. Though communism, as it was implemented in most places around the globe in the 20th century, will also be totalitarianism. There are some key differences. For example, in a fascist state, you tend to have protection of religion or an official faith, whereas in communist countries, they were atheists by law. You saw some degree of business freedom in a fascist state, where you did not have any business freedom in a communist state, but there was a lot of overlap. Totalitarianism, secret police, the use of torture, the elimination of civil liberties, massive use of propaganda, indoctrination of children, yada, 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 yada. But bottom line, fascism is starting to become a new popular style of governing, and its origins come from Italy. Fascism comes from the Italian word fasces, which is going back to the Roman times, of the bundles of sticks that kind of showed leadership back during the ancient Roman times. And so the man that is, given credit for inventing what we would describe as fascism is Italy's Benito Mussolini. Now, Mussolini will come to power in 1921, right after World War I ends, at a time where there was political instability. The economy in Italy was very shaky, trying to transition back from the war. and he will be able to use pretty much, propaganda writing, populism, in other words, connecting with the average Italian very, very well, working class American, or working class Italian, and a focus on toughness, machismo, a sense of might makes right, anti-intellectualism, to, kind of whip up the Italian people to follow him as a leader, to have total authority in Italy. Mussolini having grand visions of restoring the great pride of the ancient Roman times. And, so understand that fascism, is very popular in communities and in countries where they've been downtrodden, where they've felt a lack of respect, a lack of strength, a lack of empowerment. And fascism gives folks that sense that it's okay to be aggressive. It's okay to be demanding. It's okay to flex your muscles and show off and exert your dominance over others because you are innately superior to others. So Mussolini is going to kind of lay the groundwork for what is fascism, and therefore installing himself into power as Il Duce in Italy. But keep in mind that even though Mussolini invents fascism, he's not the most famous leader associated with fascism. That, of course, that credit goes to, or that infamy goes to Adolf Hitler, as you can see here from this campaign poster back in 1932. Adolf Hitler will be a political radical starting right after the end of World War I, in which he was a veteran of that conflict. And Germany, even worse than Italy, was suffering from transitioning from World War I. We saw an attempt at a republic, the Weimar Republic, after the Kaiser is kicked out of power. But it is very weak, it is unstable, and the economy goes right down the tubes. Remember, a lot of that is going to be fueled by the reparations that are owed from the Treaty of Versailles and an unwillingness for the United States and the Allies to forgive those debts. So you have this collapsing economy, and you have a nation that is desperate for hope, desperate for pride, desperate for strength. Because remember, Germany's lost territory. It's lost most of its ability to militarize. It is in this very desperate, weak, sad state. And what's interesting about Hitler is that Hitler is going to be a 1920s era political extremist. And he actually does try to overthrow the German government in the 1920s. This was known as the Beer Hall Putsch, but it fails. And Hitler's arrested and imprisoned for about a year. One might have thought, well, okay, you'll never see from him again, but he does get released. He has basically a blueprint for what he wants to do in the book entitled Mein Kampf, and is going to be able to take advantage of the Great Depression to really find that support that he didn't quite have a few years earlier. So you've got a nation of people that are desperate for power, desperate for recognition, desperate for prosperity, and Hitler is promising that. And he does that by promising to restore German greatness, to provide for a strong economy, and of course point the fingers at who he thinks are Germany's real enemies. And it's not just the Allies in Western Europe, but it also is going to be especially Jews and other what he would consider to be undesirables, homosexuals, gypsies, etc. Folks that he did not consider to be real Germans. And so what are Hitler's goals? Well, Hitler's goals are pretty clear. He wants to expand Germany. He wants Germany to have what he calls Lebensraum, living space for farms and big families. He is committed to trying to unify all ethnic Germans under his control. He calls it Ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer. One people, one empire, one leader, and him, of course, being that leader. And so Hitler sweeps into power. He's first elected as chancellor, and then quickly kind of knocks off any vestiges of democracy and takes control of the country. And so now you have, by the early 1930s, two major powers now dominated by fascist dictators, Mussolini in Italy and Hitler in Germany. And folks, if you thought this was bad, we are just getting started. So we'll leave it here for now. Next time we'll talk about further aggressiveness by dangerous forces and America's response to it. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.